Welcome to All Home Care Matters, the show where we discuss all things home care, with discussions on important age-related matters and topics. Brought to you by Enriched Life Home Care Services, the #1 rated home care provider in Michigan by Top Rated Local.
Hello, and welcome back to All Home Care Matters. If this is your first time visiting us here at the show, we want to say thank you for taking time out to be with us today. We appreciate how valuable everyone's time is, and that's why we try and make each episode here at All Home Care Matters something that will hopefully matter to you. Today, I am honored to welcome a remarkable guest, the former state senator from Texas, Mr. Max Sherman, and the author of Releasing the Butterfly, A Love Affair in 4 Acts. Welcome, Max. How are you today?
Lance, it's good to be with you, and it's good to reach across the country from Texas to Michigan.
Yes, it is. Well, it's a little, send some of that sun and warmth here, because it's definitely not warm or sunny. So, Max, let's start a little bit about your journey. You married your beautiful wife, Jean Alice, and you served as a Texas state senator, and I want to talk a little bit about, kind of what led you to your career now in advocating and, talking about your book.
Be glad to do that. Give you whatever history is helpful to you and your listeners.
Yes, sir. So let's start there. What inspired you to share your personal journey in releasing the butterfly?
I guess the best way to say it, Lance, is that it was agony. When Alzheimer's hits, you think your world is destroyed. And we're speaking about a married couple that were married for about 62 years. And literally the book started, historically, I was fictionalizing in my mind. I was in a room getting hospice. I was dying. My family was all around. It was fictional. Someone asked me a question, and I look up into the sky, and I see a theater stage floating. And in high school, I had a role in the play by Thornton Wilder called Our Town, and the two main characters in there are Emily and George. And so I decided that I could write about Emily and George, but not Max and Jean Alice. And so the very first thing that was written in the book was a scene, just one scene in a play. And then the other main character in Our Town is the stage manager. And so I converted that to be George being the patient and also the therapist. And so every night I would wake up at 3:00 in the morning or whenever and talk to myself, and I would ask myself questions. So then scene 1 developed into scene 2, and scene 2 to 3, and then you had 1 act finished, and then 2 acts and 3 acts, and then it morphed into 5 acts, and it was all written as a play. And then a lot of my friends and family knew that I was struggling, and so one of them said, well, you ought to try to turn it into a book. And so the first time I attempted that, it was a book which it was all written in Emily's voice. It was a woman telling her story. And the name of it was One Hell of a Woman, because that was kind of the way I saw it. And then a friend also told me, he said, you can't do that. One voice is too hard to follow. So anyway, I kept being encouraged and encouraged and encouraged. I never intended to write a book. I never intended to publish a book. And then someone said, well, it could be helpful to other people that are going down that journey. And I think you may know it, but the International Journal on Alzheimer's Disease, which is published in Holland, it's one that goes all around the world to doctors and scientists that are working on trying to figure out how to deal with Alzheimer's. They asked someone to review the book. So in their August edition of this year, they reviewed my Releasing the Butterfly, and that sent it around the world. And that was all pure accident, pure accident. when Gene Alice and I were very young, and I was in the Texas Senate, one of my colleagues was named Babe Schwartz, and he was supposed to represent Texas. And you have to realize there are only 31 Texas senators. It's and a Texas state senator represents more people than the governor of the United States senators of Wyoming or Delaware or small states. And so you're representing 600 to 1,000 to 1,000,000 people. And Babe was in a lawsuit, and the judge would not let him out, so he recommended that I take his place. So we went to Israel, and we were at Tel Aviv University.
Wow.
And so for all these years since 1976, I've been able to follow what's going on at that university in Israel. And I saw they had a major program on Alzheimer's. I didn't know how. I tried to bring it up and couldn't. I contacted a friend who knew the university, and he made me in touch with the former head of that Alzheimer's unit, who then learned about the book and sent it to the editor of the Alzheimer's Disease Journal. And so all of a sudden we're off and running, and that kind of helped let me know that maybe it had value for other people.
Sure. I want to talk about when you and Jean Alice first found out she had a problem. Was it at a doctor's office? Was it you started noticing things and you said, we need to go get this checked? What was that initial those first days like for you and her?
Well, after leaving the Senate, I became president of a university, one of the regional universities. And then I was asked to become dean of the Lyndon B. Johnson School of Public Affairs at the University of Texas. And it's only a graduate school, very elite. You have about 300 students. They come from all over the world, top students everywhere. And so we knew we were going to be moving permanently to Austin, Texas. And we built a home. We built it to entertain, because I was going to be very busy and I had a political background and we knew a lot of people there. So we built our home to entertain. And so for several years, we entertained about 4 or 5 times in the month of December. Jewish holiday, Christmas, Christian holiday, and other for academics, business, political. And we had people in about 4 or 5 times during that 1 month. And we did that for several years and loved it. And we each had our roles. And in 2002, we were having a glass of wine. And Jean Alice said, Max, for the first time, I really have felt the pressure of all this. And I used to be able to recall thousands of names. And all of a sudden, I had to struggle to do that. And I really think maybe I should see a doctor. So she was her own doctor. Yeah, she was her own doctor. And then our son-in-law, who is from Mexico, they lived in Dallas, and he was the vice president at the University of Texas at Dallas. University of Texas at Dallas has under its auspices something called the Brain Health Center. It's a very elite, very well-recognized institution. The leading doctor there is at Southwestern Medical School. So our son-in-law, Carlos, arranged for us to go up in January of 2003. And we went up, and she went through 2 days of being examined and taking tests. With most of the time, I was not even allowed to be in the room. They were just visiting with her. And they came out with a baseline and a diagnosis and said she was brilliant, she was beautiful, she handled herself well, but there were some early signs. And so for the next about 12 years, Lance, we met with Dr. Hart, who was at Southwestern Medical School, one of the leading doctors in this field, once a week. And then sometime in the middle of that, we went back for another weekend, 2-day evaluation where they went back through everything. And so we were getting a line all the way through, and they made some recommendations that instead of saying Lance, and I might not remember your name, I say, oh, friend, or some other name that would be easy and not make me feel guilty about not remembering. And then we saw Dr. Hart. And after about the 12th year, we went to see him usually in December. And he had 4 or 5 interns there to learn the technique of looking and checking for these issues. And after it was over, he said, she should be worse, but she's not. She listens to my questions. She looks me in the eyes. She's dressed beautifully. If you don't need to come back, if nothing that you see significant happens, then you won't need to come back next year. Well, the next year, she's a church organist and a pianist and beautiful musician, led choral music, sang in choral groups. And she was chairman of the committee in our Presbyterian church to rebuild the organ. And they built a brand new, huge, beautiful organ. So in February of 2014, we dedicate the organ. And her birthday is February the 7th. And so we had one group of people on the 7th. We filled our church. People came to listen. And we had the organist from the water maker in Philadelphia who came down to dedicate it. And it's a beautiful organ. And we did another one on the 8th with some musician friends. And then she was on photos. She was on top of the world. She was in the sanctuary enjoying every moment of it. And the very next month in April, I guess it is, March or April, we're sitting in our apartment in our retirement home watching a television station. And she says, "Who are you? You're not my husband." And then she says, "You've got to get out of here. I'm going to open the door." So she starts to the door. And I get up, and she had had 2 or 3 incidences before. And the nurse in the retirement home recommended putting 3 chairs at the door. So if I were asleep, it would wake me up and I could go. So I was rushing to move the chairs and slipped and shattered a femur in my leg. And I had to be gone for the next several weeks because it wasn't just broken, it was shattered because I had socks on. Didn't dream I would do that. So we have 2 children, a son and a daughter. And so I'm in the hospital getting fixed. And they have to take care of her because she can't live alone. There are different places. So they had to make the decisions. And since you're talking, your program is called, Taking Care at Home, up until that time, I probably would have waited another some indefinite period of time to try to get help. But all of a sudden, I'm in the hospital, and they make the decision for her to go to health care and then to memory care. And we've been there ever since for the last almost 9 years.
Okay. I want to ask you, Max, all the, academia, politics, all these things. What was your, if somebody said, Senator, how would you describe Alzheimer's? What would you have said before this journey you went on with Gene Ellis?
Well, you raised what I think is a serious, serious question. I probably was like most people and rarely would have ever said the word Alzheimer's. Mm-hmm. There's a stigma attached to it. And we lived in the retirement home 3 years before Alzheimer's hit like a tsunami, just overshadowed us. No one ever mentions Alzheimer's. But once it hits, everyone talks about Alzheimer's.
Right.
They're worried about it. And I think until we get it out in the open and talk about it, I knew we had memory issues. I knew that we had early stage of memory deficiency, and probably the doctors had all had mentioned Alzheimer's, but I don't really recall that I ever used the term. So I think you put your finger on a very serious question for all of us.
Absolutely, absolutely. How would you characterize the way your perception of it changed given your experience with Jean Alice?
I think you first think, as I said, the way the book started, I thought our lives had ended, her life and mine. And I think an issue that gets overlooked is that many times the caregiver is struggling desperately.
Yeah.
And it's a different kind of struggle and desperation for a husband and wife, because you've been living together, sleeping together, having meals together. A child and a parent, you may have been away from your parents for a period of time,
Right.
and therefore you're coming back home. Or if it's a grandparent, it's different. So the relationship is different. But I think that I'm a lawyer by training. In fact, we already have gravestones in the cemetery. And mine says, "What are you?" I was a lawyer by training, a politician by practice, and an academic by accident. And so that pretty much sums up my thinking about it. But as a lawyer, I'd given a lot of advice to people, and then they didn't follow it, and then they got into trouble, and then they really needed my help. So I know something about following professional advice.
Sure.
And so while I'm in the hospital, the professionals at our retirement home advised me that she's now in a separate room, and when you get back, she's going to want to leave there and come back and be with you. But they said, if you possibly can, don't go down to see her. Don't see her. So for about 3 months, I followed that advice.
That's hard advice.
It is. It's tough. If you excuse my language, it was hell. I felt like it was the end of our lives. But I would call her every morning at 10 and every evening at 6. And she would always say, "You've got to come and get me. I need to be with you. I can pack my clothes. I shouldn't be here." And so, but I stayed away, and she began to realize that was when. And when I realized, "Why don't you go visit with her a short period of time?" So I went over to see her for a short period of time. And then they extended the time, and we extended it. We started having meals together, and they were, as part of the evolution, as we had those meals, they were wonderful. We celebrated Father's Day with my son and me and her, and she was glad to have her 2 men with her. That's her term, 2 men. But then later, she'd say, "Well, and have trouble saying the words." And so you begin to see an evolution of the deterioration of the mind. And then we found that rather than a 45-minute breakfast or an hour breakfast, it got shorter and shorter, and an aide would bring her over. And then one time it was evident that she had moved to another world, and I texted the aide and told her, I said, "You'll have to come back. I don't think we're going to make it through breakfast this morning." And so that was part of, if I can jump ahead, I don't want to mess up your questions.
Please do.
But we're now into the 9th year. I still see her every morning and every afternoon. And in the morning, we meet at different places around this community we're in. And if her head is down straight, she's hearing every word I'm saying. And as you know from talking to me here, my voice is kind of raspy, kind of high pitched. And if I say, "Jeannie, can I get a kiss?" that old head pops up, and she looks over, and the eyes open, and she smiles. But our kisses are different. You know what our kisses are now?
What's that?
They're a smile, a wink, and then she was an organist, and she can do something I can't do, and that's she can raise her big toe up all by itself. So I may be sitting in chair beside her, kind of massaging her foot, and if I say, "Can I get a kiss?" and she opens it and eyes, and she pops that toe up, that's her kiss back to me. That's a kiss. That's a kiss. And then another one she has is, that's a kiss. Now, most people won't know that and watch them from the outside.
Right.
But I think each caregiver needs to be very sensitive to the signals of their loved one, whether it's a parent, a grandparent, husband, or wife, because their signals will be different than mine. But I'm sure each individual has some set of signals to communicate.
Right. All in their own way. I'm very fond of saying and it's so true, Max, when you've seen one person who has dementia, you've only seen one person, because it affects everybody entirely and drastically differently, and it's just focusing on your loved one and knowing them and how it is going to affect them. And sometimes we don't know until it happens.
That's right.
I want to talk about, this process that you went through, because I'm sure, it was exhausting, but not necessarily in a physical way, but more in an emotional and a mental taxing, writing this book. Can you walk through the process of writing it and, what you were experiencing while going through it?
I think it was a little bit of a revolution to me, because as I wrote almost instinctively in those scenes in the play, when you go back and read it, you realize there's also some communication there. And one of the surprising things to me is that a chapter that I wrote, it's in the book, you can read it, is in a doctor whom I don't know and haven't met and probably never will, who he has some kind of a distribution list of a lot of doctors and scientists. And he said, if you want to know what it's like to be inside the mind of an Alzheimer's, this is a chapter. Well, I wrote it, but hadn't really thought about it. I wrote it for the same reason he picked it up. And it's when we're all in our home in Amarillo, Texas, and we're having to make that move to Austin for me to become dean of the LBJ school. All of our close friends in our church and community, we had a big gathering, and they had all done a little block for a quilt. And we're going to each get a big quilt with all these memories. And then the meeting is, and we get hugs and kisses, and the way the story in the book goes is that throw the quilt up and we go out and get in our little Volkswagen, and all of a sudden I reach for my car keys and I don't have any car keys. And so I think, well, I dropped them on the floor when I was reaching for, so I go back to knock on the door, but the lights are out. Our friends have turned the lights out. Everybody's gone home. No one's there. And the doctor who picked it up said it's he thinks that's an insight into what it's like to be in the mind of an Alzheimer's person, because all of a sudden, no one's there, and you can't really retrieve them. And I think a danger that caregivers make, and I watched it, and even just yesterday I saw it, you always want to say, oh, Mom, you remember, oh, you knew Lance's birthday, you remember when we did that? All of a sudden you learn you don't ask that. It's right. Not. It's important to you. It's important to the patient, but it raises a question, and to me, for me personally, one of the most important chapters in my book is number 43 or 6. I don't remember. It's only about 3 pages, but it's when we're going out and getting in, leaving from here, and she got me to get into a Pilates class, and so for 10 or 12 years we both had done Pilates regularly once a week at a certain time. Now we're in our apartment and we're going to her Pilates, and we get in the elevator, go down to the ground floor where our car is, and I'm going to be the driver. And when the elevator stops and we start down, I say, oh, Jeannie, let's better hurry. We need to be on time. And she says, oh, don't worry. They won't start without me. And we're just having the best time, and we hold hands and we go down. And when we get there, she backs off into the corner of the elevator, and she just looks at me fiercely. Says, I'm not going to that place again. I'm not going to that place again. I knew then that she had no idea what that place was or where we were going.
Yeah.
But she didn't want to go. But the part that's probably important in our talk today is that I explode later, and I say, don't ever say that again. We're going to keep writing books. We're going to keep working puzzles. We're going to keep doing music. We're going to keep walking the dog. I was furious
Yeah.
because all of a sudden, that was the first time I realized that I was hurting tremendously as a caregiver. And in that little chapter in the book where I said up until then, I was doing everything. I would pick out her clothes. I made the breakfast. I made the bed. I picked the stations on television. And I think it's a danger that we make as caregivers. We want to take care of everything. We're fixers.
Right.
And it's something you're not going to fix. And
So,
once you realize it, and all of a sudden I realized that it's not very significant, but to flip the switch.
yeah. How long?
Instead of saying, I've done this, oh, Jeannie, would you like chocolate or vanilla ice cream? You want to go watch a movie or you want to watch a play? Do you want to sing a song or maybe a musical? Oh, no, you decide. But the headline, as I've written about it, is the headline is she absolutely needed to be asked.
Yes.
And what I say is I was stealing her away from her, nibble by nibble, bit by bit, because every time I did it, the person who has a great feeling of her own autonomy, she knew who she was. I'm Jeannie. And every time I did that, I just took a little bit away from who she was.
Not even intentionally. We just
Not at all.
Right.
Not at all.
Well, how was your oftentimes, we deal with a lot of families in very similar circumstances with our company, and sometimes there's a sibling who wants to take charge. Sometimes there's a sibling that wants to take charge and wants to do everything. Like you said, they want to be a fixer, but they're a great support for their mom or their dad who's helping their sick mom or dad, And then sometimes you have the sibling who just doesn't want to be around because they don't want to have those memories of what mom or dad became. How did your son and daughter, how did they both handle the news of mom and kind of the diagnosis?
I think one of the things that was helpful to them is that one of the themes in the book it was written the way it was, but I didn't really think of it being that significant. But even one of the blurbs on the back of the book from the woman who ran humanities around the country, she picked up that hers was a real partnership, that we really lived our lives with two different worlds and yet one world. And that allowed her, that's why the name of the book is Releasing the Butterfly, and why it took me 3 proposals for her to agree to marry me. She didn't know she wanted to give up her autonomy. She wanted to be who she was. So we, without discussing it, but knowing instinctively, so both our son and daughter had grown up knowing that I lived a world over here and did that. She did things over here, took people to Europe on trips she was head of the conference center at the University of Texas. And I did my things and traveled the world in my role as dean of the OBJ school. And yet we ran for office together. We got elected together. And if it hadn't been another time, she would have made a better state senator than I would because she was so independent. But women were not going to be elected during that time.
Right. Did they?
So the answer to your question I didn't get is that I think our kids throughout their lives knew that we would continue to be able to negotiate as partners, even though she was living in one place and I was living in another.
Were they hesitant though to be around mom once, the Alzheimer's kind of, like you said, that tsunami overtook her, or were they still coming regularly? Are they able to come regularly, or how does that work for them?
Our daughter lives in Dallas, so she has to come and go from a longer distance, and our son here, and they both have children and busy lives. But yes, they did come, and the great thing about it, even to this day, if one of them comes and says, "Here, I'm here, Mom," she'll pop that head up because she knows they're there.
Yeah.
So even now, that connection is very, very genuine and very real.
Oh, that's wonderful, Max. How did you find the strength and, the resilience during some of the most challenging times on your journey with Gene Alice? What sustained you?
I think one thing is that we grew up Southern Baptist, and we were both. Her grandfather was a Baptist minister, and she played the piano in her churches all the years. Then we became Presbyterians, and she was the organist in a big steeple Presbyterian church in Amarillo. And I was always, in fact, in the early days, someone said my grandfather thought I ought to be a preacher until he asked me to speak one time, and he realized I wasn't going to be a preacher. But I think a religious faith in our case was very important.
That's wonderful.
We knew we were loved, and we knew there was a God. We couldn't tell you how to describe that God, but that was there. And we knew we had love, family, and friends who also were there. And so we weren't alone. And I think that was as important as anything, is to know you have a community that is there. One of the things that haunts me living where I do is that there are people that don't have that.
Right.
They're very alone. They have no children, or they're alienated from their children. I had a right arm person who worked with me at the LBJ school who got into hospice work because she had a relative who needed it. And she said one of the horrifying experiences to her was to be with a woman who was alienated from her family. And Kay would go and hold her hand and stay with her. And finally she said, I think I should die, but my family are not around. And she asked her, do you think I should die? And Kay said, if you want to die, that's okay. What she was looking for was permission to close her eyes and give it up. And it haunts me that there are people that do not have the support group. And I think that's where it's important for people like you and for me, when we can. I've held the hands of two people that I rarely knew and held their hands as they passed away in a memory care unit because there was no one else there. And they weren't people that I really knew that well, had not sat down that well. But someone said, Miss So-and-so is not doing very well. Would you mind just to stop by? And I've held those two hands, and I break the other part of how do I deal with it, I think as a lawyer, I've learned how to deal. I've been to hospitals for people to sign wills, and I've done a lot. So I bottle up my emotions. And when I realize how deep it is that you may ask me a question even today in this interview, and all of a sudden it may hit a note that I'm not aware of, and I might get teary. Yeah. But to a large extent, I probably bottle it up inside and don't let it out. And that's probably not the best thing, but we are who we are.
Going back to your, was it your grandfather that wanted you to try to be a preacher?
He was.
But Max, in all seriousness, having the memory care facility grab you and have you sit with two different people, two different times, that's kind of doing God's work. You can call it the memory care chaplain even. You're comforting them in their time of need, and maybe not. Maybe you prayed with them, but that's a God thing in my book.
Well, I think it must be, and I think at the beginning of the book, you may remember how it starts off, is that I actually meet Gene Alice at the county jail in our home county, because I was with a little group of men that went over every Sunday afternoon to hold a jail service. And it was all men, all guys. And one time we invited, and I'm the speaker. I've always said I'm not the preacher, but I'm the speaker. And we bring a quartet, all men, and they bring in a young woman to accompany. So I first met Gene Alice when she was 15 and I was 18. And we first met literally in the county jail at a church service.
Wow. It's a good first date. Let's talk about, because, I'm going to say you're wise now because you have lived this and you have committed so much of your life at this point to, Gene Ellis and, the awareness of dementia and Alzheimer's. What advice would you give to someone who's maybe listening or watching this right now who is just embarking on that journey? What advice can you offer them?
I think the most important thing, it sounds kind of crazy, but to be open to the possibilities and to realize that things will change. And how do you live with change? As I say, that's kind of why the kisses from the big toe are so important, because you learn to love in a different way. And I love the hugs are very important, and they're still important. And sometimes you don't have to say anything, but just to hold a hand or to hug or to be there. And there's a Jewish statement from Maimonides, I believe it is, it says that many people, when you go to visit, don't say anything, just be there.
Just be
and
there.
I think that's extremely important, is to be there and let them know, and occasionally just say something, and you need anything. Can I give you a kiss? Oh, let me pull the blinds up. It doesn't sound like much, but whoever the loved one is, they know in a very religious sense. It may be godly.
Yeah.
We don't see the God around us, but if you believe in it, you know that there is a God there. And right now, as you and I are talking, there is a God here with us in some way that we can't explain. But I think to be there may be the most important.
Absolutely. Do you have a favorite section of the book or a favorite passage? I believe you have a passage you like to read. Would you like to read that for us?
Well, it's the one I referred to a little bit a moment ago.
Yeah.
And if you don't mind, I'd
No,
be glad
not at all.
Actually, now this tells me that it's chapter 46. The volcano that simmered deep within Gene Ellis's mind erupted one morning in, of all places, the elevator at Westminster. We were heading out to her weekly Pilates session to join her 5 friends. I made the breakfast, laid out her work clothes, and nudged her. Oh, let's be on time. I held her hand as we hurried to the elevator. She was smiling. Oh, don't worry, she said. They won't leave without me. They won't start without me. As the elevator reached the garage door where our Volkswagen was parked, she backed away to the far side of the elevator, crouched with her shoulders hunched back, looked me straight in the eye, and then she exploded. I'm not going to that place again. I am certain she did not know what that place was, just as she had no idea where the club or the school was when she got lost taking her granddaughters to school. Her powerfully ingrained instinct was for her to decide whether to go or not to go somewhere. And I was out of line to think I was in charge. She had always jealously guarded her right to be in charge of decisions affecting her. That was the key to her identity. I had failed to appreciate that fact on that morning, alone in the elevator with Jeannie. I now realize that to her, I was a drill sergeant, incessantly barking orders. Get in line. You're out of step. Hurry up. You're late. Do this. Do that. It wasn't just about leaving the home and being on time for appointments. I was making all the decisions. I chose the TV shows we watch. I chose the food we ate. I chose the clothes she wore. I did the driving. I read the map and determined the route, something that she had always done. I selected the paragraph from the newspaper for us to read together and then read it to her. I suggested that it was time to take the dog for a walk. I urged her to play the piano. And my ultimate insult was to say, let's be on time. Inside her, the Jeannie I had always known was shouting, I am Jeannie. Don't Treat me like a thing. I am Jeannie. I am strong, confident woman. I was stealing Jeannie from Jeannie, nibble by nibble. In the midst of the storm, I forgot that I was her partner, not her parent. Instead of making every decision for her, I should have asked her what she wanted. Would you prefer chocolate or strawberry ice cream? What do you want to watch tonight, a comedy or a spy movie? Should we sing hymns or songs from the musical? Are you about ready to go to bed? Most of the time she would say, oh, you decide. But I had missed the headline. She wanted to be asked. No, no, no. She needed to be asked. She wanted to be treated like she was someone, like Jeannie. And now she had to defend herself or risk totally losing her autonomy. All of this is obvious to me now, but in the moment, I was furious. I exploded with my own profusion of pent-up frustration that morning. Don't ever say that again. We're going to keep exercising, working puzzles, reading books, seeing movies, doing everything possible to stay alive as long as we are alive. The last paragraph is, I didn't realize it then, but I was grieving. Just as all caregivers mourn the lives they once had and the persons they loved once had been before Alzheimer's marked them indelibly. In the last sentence, I wanted my Jeannie back.
That's beautiful, Max. Thank you for sharing that. And I want to kind of just wrap up here and ask a couple more last questions. What are you hoping that readers, viewers, listeners, if you could pick the one thing that anyone that reads this story of you and Jean Alice, what is it you hope they take away from it?
I think it's that there is hope. There is hope of some kind of a life that is meaningful and maybe not understandable, but it's meaningful. I think, again, you asked about religion a moment ago. I think it's hope. Yeah. And so I would say hope is probably the key.
Yeah, absolutely. Because without hope, we have nothing, you know. And what do you remember your last conversation with Jean Alice before the dementia, the Alzheimer's had kind of taken over?
I think it would be at one of those dinners we had when we were dedicating the organ. And when I was trying to woo her when she was still 17 and we were she was a freshman at Baylor University and I was a senior. And I would meet her in the library. I would sneak up in the library and sit at the same table. Then I would offer to walk her back to her dorm. And I knew she loved literature. I loved literature. We loved poetry. We loved history. And so I knew that. So I started memorizing a couple of sonnets. One of them is the Shakespeare sonnet, which probably is applicable to your show. How do I love thee? Let me count the ways. I love thee to the depths. And how do I love thee? Let me count the ways. I love thee to the reaches of depths. But if life choose, I shall love thee better after death. But that sonnet of 14, I would say had both of them written. One was a Shelley poem about love, but both of them were love poems. And so on both of those nights, when the whole group was around a little table, we were celebrating the organ, I would say those two poems to her because she loved them. They were part of our lives from 17 to now into our late 80s. Yeah. And so actually it was poetry.
That's wonderful. And last question, if we don't talk for the next few years and we ran into each other, what's Max Sherman up to?
I hope I'm up to still realizing that there's a day tomorrow, that there's hope, and that actually I'm writing a novel that I never dreamed I would write. Okay. And so I wrote a rough draft of it, but if you'd asked me would I do that, and it all started with dealing with dementia and Alzheimer's, I realized that I have a book about Barbara Jordan that is more fundamental of when I was dean, and we were colleagues at the LBJ school. But I would say, Lance, I'm still at it.
There you go. Well, I hope you are too, Max, because I think you're a great advocate in helping to raise awareness and, sharing these stories. And, you really mentioned it where you said, Gene Alice's kisses are different. It's not the physical kiss anymore. It's, different cues. And I think that for me is one of the most important things is people realizing, your loved one may have dementia, they may have Alzheimer's, whatever the case may be, but they're still a person and they still need that integrity and that dignity that's afforded to them for being an adult. And they may not react the same way, they may not talk the same way, but they're still entitled that dignity, and we should all give that to them because they have a lot to offer, even still.
Well, I think you just put your finger on it, is that we need to respect the dignity of the being.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Mr. Max Sherman, former state senator of Texas and author of Releasing the Butterfly, A Love Affair in 4 Acts, thank you so much for sharing you and Gene Alice's story with us today.
Lance, thank you very much. It's great to have it. I just hope we touch the hearts and souls of some people who are struggling. We all struggle, and don't feel guilty about struggle. It's part of the process.
Absolutely. Well, you have a good day, my friend.
Bye-bye to you.
Thank you for joining us today here at All Home Care Matters. All Home Care Matters is here to help families as they navigate these long-term care issues. We invite you to visit us at allhomecarematters.com, where there's a private, secure, fillable form where you can give us feedback, show ideas, or if you have questions. Every form is read and responded to. And remember, you can listen to the show on any of your favorite podcast streaming platforms or watch the show on our official YouTube channel. Just make sure that you hit that subscribe button so that you never miss an episode. We'd also like to say thank you again to Mr. Max Sherman for joining us today. We look forward to seeing you next time here at All Home Care Matters.
Thank you for joining us today. We look forward to you joining us again on another episode of All Home Care Matters. To learn more about the show and to connect with us, visit us at allhomecarematters.com.